Have you ever wondered why malaria never wiped out Europeans? Why did mosquito-borne diseases fail to devastate Asian or African populations who'd never even heard of quinine? And how do we know that mosquitoes really are to blame for so many plagues? In this episode of our series, Who's Responsible?, we're going to try and answer some of these questions by exploring a theory about how our ancestors' encounters with deadly bugs may have shaped the course of world history. It's me, and you're watching this channel. Before we get into it, we want to give a huge shout out to our patrons who make videos like this one possible. If you want to see your name at the end of episodes, then you too can support us. Find the link in the description below. If you've watched our previous episodes on smallpox and the Columbian Exchange, then you already know that when Europeans began colonizing the New World, they unwittingly unleashed biological warfare. Diseases like smallpox killed millions of indigenous people. But Old World diseases weren't the only ones that crossed the Atlantic. Starting in the 1620s, European colonists began reporting mysterious illnesses afflicting them in their new home. Malaria, yellow fever, dengue, chikungunya, encephalitis, and plague were just a few of the diseases plaguing settlers along the eastern seaboard. It wasn't until 1793 that yellow fever devastated Philadelphia and killed an estimated 5,000 people that scientists started to investigate the cause. At the time, the leading theories blamed contaminated water and the miasma, or bad air, coming from rotting garbage in sewers. But we now know that these outbreaks were caused by mosquitoes, specifically two species, Aedes aegypti and Anopheles crugens. These two bit humans picked up disease from our blood, then spread it through their saliva when they bit someone else. But what exactly were they spreading? The culprit has never been definitively identified, but it was likely yellow fever, a viral hemorrhagic disease causing high fever, jaundice, bleeding, and organ failure. Yellow fever was brought to the New World in the 1640s and continued to periodically ravage coastal cities for the next 3 centuries. But if we know which mosquitoes were spreading it, and we know roughly when it arrived, why don't we know more about its origins? Because figuring out where diseases come from is harder than it might seem. Today, scientists use highly advanced techniques to sequence the DNA and RNA of pathogens, identify their genetic markers, and trace their evolutionary history. But in the late 18th century, scientists didn't know what pathogens even were, let alone how to identify them. The idea that microscopic organisms could cause illness was first proposed in Europe in the mid-1800s, and it would take decades before that theory was widely accepted. But even once scientists realized that microbes were behind disease, they still had to figure out which microbe was responsible for each illness. And that's not easy, because a single disease can be caused by several different pathogens, or one pathogen can cause several different diseases. For example, the bacterium Vibrio cholerae causes cholera, but a related bacterium, Vibrio parahemolyticus, can also cause similar symptoms, though usually less severe. Scientists eventually narrowed down the suspected pathogens causing yellow fever to 2 contenders, a virus and a bacterium. To identify the infectious agent, they injected mice with blood from infected patients. Both the virus and bacteria killed the mice, so the scientists couldn't tell them apart based on their effects. They needed another way to figure out which one was responsible. So, in 1881, French scientist Charles Nicole tried infecting mosquitoes with yellow fever by letting them feed on infected monkeys. He then bit the mosquitoes, and sure enough, they passed the disease along to other animals. This proved that the infectious agent was transmitted by insects and marked the discovery of the first vector-borne disease. But because they still didn't have technology to identify the actual pathogen, all they could conclude was that a virus was responsible. They wouldn't discover the true cause of yellow fever, a flavivirus, until 1927. But knowing that mosquitoes spread a dangerous virus wasn't enough to stop the panics that ensued. Whenever the insects showed up carrying other mysterious diseases, by the early 1900s, the United States was experiencing an outbreak of a mosquito-borne disease called West Nile fever, which was named after the Ugandan village where it was first identified. The symptoms were flu-like, and most people recovered. But that didn't stop Americans from freaking out and implementing massive mosquito control programs to stamp out the disease. Cities spent upwards of $1 million, equivalent to about $30 million today, fumigating standing water and spraying oil to kill off breeding grounds. The campaign was effective at reducing mosquito populations, but wasn't able to completely eradicate West Nile fever, which continues to circulate in the U.S. today. But the fear around mosquito-borne diseases in the early 1900s did inspire one very positive development. Mosquito eradication efforts uncovered a surprising number of the insects' hiding holes, places where they could breed without being exposed to the elements. The team working in Central America found 23 different types of artificial containers that could hold water, including discarded tin cans, old bottles, broken flower pots, and even animal skulls. Eliminating these breeding sites would be a smart way to reduce mosquito populations. But getting people to clean up their trash wasn't a very politically savvy way to raise public health. So in 1901, the Bureau of Entomology, the precursor to the EPA, launched a new campaign, Clean Up Your Lot. Don't be a smokester. The campaign inspired a generation of public service announcements and continues to influence our approach to mosquito control today. All this work was done to prevent mosquito-borne diseases from devastating human populations. But throughout history, mosquitoes may have played a more positive role. In 1911, British explorer Sir Patrick Manson noted that he'd never gotten malaria despite living in malarial regions of India and Africa. Manson theorized that exposure to mosquito-borne diseases like malaria might actually protect against others like yellow fever. This idea was dismissed until researchers discovered something weird was happening to American troops stationed in jungle training centers in the South Pacific during World War II. They were contracting malaria but seemed to be immune to dengue. So scientists set up a controlled experiment. They infected volunteers with dengue and found that those who'd recently had malaria were indeed immune to dengue. Researchers confirmed that certain types of immunity could be transferred between mosquito-borne diseases and coined the term heterologous immunity. Not only did this explain why some people seemed immune to multiple diseases, it provided a potential solution to the outbreaks plaguing the U.S. Why not infect people with one mosquito-borne disease to protect them from another? There was just one problem. While infecting people with yellow fever to protect them from malaria seems like a great idea, there was no vaccine for yellow fever yet, and exposing people to the deadly virus would probably kill them. But by the late 1950s, scientists developed a safe yellow fever vaccine using a weakened strain of the virus. That led to the first large-scale immunization campaign in the Western Hemisphere and helped eradicate the deadly disease from the continent. Since then, campaigns to immunize against deadly mosquito-borne diseases have reduced the global death toll significantly. But scientists suspect that some populations were naturally immune to these diseases long before vaccines were developed. That brings us back to our original question: why did diseases like malaria never wipe out Europeans? The answer, it turns out, is complicated. Some scientists think that populations living in hot climates where malaria is common may have developed immunity to the disease, making it less deadly. Other researchers argue that malaria actually benefits people living in tropical environments because it kills off the mosquitoes that spread deadly diseases like yellow fever and dengue. Still others hypothesize that humans co-evolved with malaria parasites, meaning we became better at fighting them off, while the parasites became better at exploiting us. For now, we don't have definitive answers, but we do know that Anopheles mosquitoes carrying the Plasmodium parasite made it to Greece and southern Italy by 700 BC, and Greek and Roman texts describe debilitating fevers afflicting their populations. But because these regions are outside the optimal range for mosquito habitats, malaria never became widespread in Europe. So, while the idea that mosquitoes defeated colonizers seems like an intriguing and dramatic explanation for depopulation, it's probably not quite accurate. It is true that mosquito-borne diseases ravaged Native American populations, killing an estimated 50 million people. But to blame mosquitoes alone oversimplifies a complex web of factors contributing to the collapse of indigenous societies, including a pre-existing population decline due to earlier epidemics, warfare, and displacement. And while mosquitoes definitely contributed to the deaths of millions of non-native Europeans, they didn't defeat them. Europeans adapted to mosquito-borne diseases in much the same way that they adapted to every other challenge they faced. They experimented with new medicines and created new technologies to control their insect foes. By the mid-1900s, pesticides and bed nets, treated with insecticides like DDT, drastically reduced mosquito populations and the diseases they spread. In 1955, the World Health Organization launched the Global Eradication Program for malaria, with the goal of stamping out the disease worldwide by 1968. By 1967, there were only a handful of countries left where malaria was endemic. But shortly after, drug-resistant strains of Plasmodium parasites emerged in South America, Southeast Asia, and Africa, and the WHO shifted its focus to controlling malaria rather than eradicating it. Because of advances in medicine and public health, malaria deaths have dropped 60% since 2000, and with continued global efforts, the dream of a world without mosquitoes may not be as far-fetched as you might think. In fact, in 2021, the first country was declared malaria-free by the World Health Organization. Eradicating mosquitoes altogether might be impossible, but eliminating the diseases they spread doesn't have to be. Before we wrap up, we have a quick announcement. Our Spanish language channel is now live. To the channel's page to subscribe and join us for fun science interactives designed for young learners and their grown-ups. Thanks for watching. If you liked this episode, check out our episode on how colonialism changed the world.